The question now is that the amendment moved by the honourable member for Clark to the amendment moved by the member for Griffith be disagreed to, and I call the member for Hunter.
And I thank you and the House, Mr Deputy Speaker, for the opportunity, and I do rise to speak on the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Amendment, Standards and Assurance Bill of 2021. And of course this bill and the bill that was debated, I think last year now in this place, both seek to amend the EPBC and to implement the recommendations of the so-called Samuel Review. The EPBC is now 21 years old, Mr Deputy Speaker. It was a creature of the Howard government and a welcome reinforcement of the Commonwealth's role in environmental policy in this country. It was a Labor government, I think in 2008, that decided to put in place a statutory 10-year review of the Act, the first one done immediately under Dr Alan Hawke, and now 10 years on, done under Graham Samuel, the former chair of the ACCC and a pretty highly regarded Australian. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, there is no doubt, and I've heard many say it throughout the course of this debate, that our environmental challenges are very, very significant. There can be no doubt about that, and I don't think anyone in this building is arguing otherwise. But so too are our economic challenges, and we need to get the balance right. As the Samuel Review noted, our natural environment is in a state of decline and coming under increasing threat from human and other behaviour. But it is also true that investors are being held back by a complex and cumbersome regulatory regime. I say regimes plural very deliberately because projects which trigger Commonwealth scrutiny face two very, very long processes. First at the state level, it can take years, and then of course at the Commonwealth level, where again the process can take years. And given the impacts of COVID-19, as we work hopefully our way out of it, we're all fearing tonight we might be going back into it, but as we hopefully work our way out of it, we are all acutely aware that it's now more important than ever to stimulate investment and nation building in this country. Now, Graham Samuel made it clear that the EPBC in its current form is delivering neither for the environment nor for the economy and those who operate in our economy. Indeed, he also concluded it's not working or delivering for our traditional owners. And that is something we must fix, and we must fix it collectively, and we must find a greater level, Mr Deputy Speaker, of bipartisanship on this issue if we're going to do this right, and we're going to do it in a timely way. Now, 21 years ago, the Commonwealth decided to exercise its constitutional power to engage itself more heavily in the regulation of economic investment and its impact on our natural environment, and that was a very good thing. That was a very good thing. And since 2019, the centrepiece of national environmental law, replacing a number of Whitlam-era acts, has been the EPBC. And I think it's served us pretty well, but it's certainly not serving us good enough in this 21st century. As required by law, as I said, we are reviewing it every 10 years, and everything we discuss tonight and on the earlier bill, and there'll be more bills, relate to the 38 recommendations Graham Samuel made. Professor Samuel also warned, as I said, that the Act is not delivering for our traditional owners. And this has been something that's missing somewhat, I think, in this debate. I haven't heard every contribution, but I think we need to have a broader discussion about— I can see the solutions in this bill for regulatory burden, but I haven't yet been able to clearly identify what changes for our traditional owners. Does that further involvement of the traditional owners happen within the bilaterals. It certainly doesn't appear to be in the interim standards. Where and how do we intend to ensure that our traditional owners are more engaged and have a greater say in the future of their lands? The review offered thoughtful criticisms, I thought, of the complexity of the EPBC, its failure to protect our natural environment, and the brake it's putting on jobs growth. And, of course, its vulnerability to the vexatious legislation, which is one of the things that will be dealt with in this review if fully and properly implemented. Graham Samuel also noted that the EPBC is neither trusted by business or by the environmental groups. And that alone in itself indicates to me that we have a problem, and we have a problem that needs to be fixed. So a particular attention has been given to that two-step system that I spoke about, and of course that's the focus of the debate we're having tonight, how we get to that one-touch system, so proponents go through only one regulatory system rather than two regulatory systems, but through a system over which the Commonwealth still dictates the terms, Mr Deputy Speaker. The review found that Commonwealth environmental approvals for big resource projects take on average of 3 years. 3 years, Mr Deputy Speaker. That's after the years already invested through the state regulatory process. Indeed, the Minerals Council of Australia has estimated that on greenfields projects, a delay of every month can cost up to $47 million every month. Not every year, every month, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Productivity Commission has also sounded the alarm, suggesting that the total cost of a one-year delay of a project, a big project, is between 17% and 18% of its net present value. Now, let's say on a project of $2 billion, Mr Deputy Speaker, you don't have to be a mathematician to work out that that's a very, very significant amount of money. Graham Samuel recommended the current system's job-destroying duplication should be addressed by improving, strengthening and streamlining the capacity of the federal government to delegate Commonwealth approval functions to state governments under bilateral agreements, but only where state processes are of acceptable quality and projects will be assessed against new stringent and enforceable national environmental standards. Now, I think that's a very, very good point, Mr Deputy Speaker, because I think people are rightly concerned that the state regimes might not have the resources and the capacity to properly deal with some of these bigger projects. But that will be dealt with before the process. The Commonwealth will determine or ensure that the state has the capacity to do so, and of course the states, not unsurprisingly, will be asking the Commonwealth for some money to bolster their resources and their capacity to do so, and that should be the case, and I've no doubt that will be the case. Now, a year on from the release of the interim report, it's time to go on with the reforms needed to both better protect our iconic natural assets and to deliver a much-needed boost for our economy. The impacts of COVID-19 demand a new urgency and should generate strong and timely multi-party parliamentary support for the legislation needed to introduce the interim national environmental standards that reflect the existing requirements of the Act so that legal effect can be given to them, and to strengthen and make more robust the bilateral framework that has existed since the creation of the EPBC. Now, I've heard some people say, Mr Deputy Speaker, that the interim standards are somewhat less than the standards that existed under the Abbott government. That would set alarm bells off for me as well, Mr Deputy Speaker, I must say. But the fact is that there are no standards, or were no standards, under the regime of the Abbott government. These are the interim standards ahead of the introduction of the final standards. These standards are new, are an important and necessary part of the process of delegating the Commonwealth's powers to the states. And we must remember, Mr Deputy Speaker, that this concept of interim standards went to the National Cabinet, where the National Cabinet unanimously agreed that interim standards should be put on place so we can get on with the job, which reflect the current law and provide protections no less or more than the current protections someone would expect under the settings of the current Act. And I think that with the unanimous support of the National Cabinet, we should give very, very serious consideration to that. We cannot wait for the appropriate amount of time which will be necessary to put in place the final standards before taking the regulatory burden off some of these projects. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, I've listened to many of the contributions. Very few people have really talked directly to the Act that's before us tonight in the Parliament and today. I suspect that when this bill goes to the Senate, it and the earlier bill, the streamlining environmental approvals bills, will be dealt with cognate, as I think would be appropriate. And I think the key point that we need to focus here is those that emerge out of these two bills, not all the other general range of propositions that come out of the Samuels review per se. These are the things we need to be focusing on, and on that basis, Mr Deputy Speaker, I think it's time for the parties generally to make a commitment to getting on with the job, while at the same time, of course, expecting no less than the highest of standards that we can, when talking to our international partners in international fora, standards that we can boast about and be very proud of.